Good morning. It's good to see the audience. We've got, I think this is the first live in-person presentation I think I've done in 3 years, so I'm very, very excited about this. What I'd like to do today is, we've got a few slides before we go to our guest speakers. And what I wanted to do today was talk about a few things. One, first, what's going on with COVID. I know it's a big topic for a lot of people, but I wanted to sort of give at least a view from our side. And then talk about some of the things we're seeing in Asia. So what are what we call the tailwinds to the new economy, some of the speed bumps that we're seeing. So talk a little bit about what's going on in China, the United States, and how that impacts the region. And then just thinking about collaboration models that we might have as we start thinking about the next generation. And that's what I'll bring on the three speakers. We've got a unique group from the Middle East, India, and Europe, but all have their tentacles into the Asia-Pacific region. So it's a great group of speakers that we'll have a chance to talk to right after the presentation. As we talk about COVID, I think everyone today thinks about COVID as a curse, and we think about Omicron, and one of the things that I think sometimes we don't really think about is what our industry and the impact that we had on this last 2 years. And I think one of the things that's amazing when you start looking at the stats, almost 2 billion kids were educated thanks to our networks around the world and in Asia Pacific. You look at, we did almost 1 billion people joined the internet during this 2-year period. So if you think about the things that we did on the network on that side. If you look at technology, obviously we had our first space launches that happened. But one of the things that also is absolutely amazing is that you had Germans and Americans working together to put together a vaccine. And they did it in 1/6 the time that any vaccine had ever been done in history. And they did this by collaborating across the oceans and together. And I think one of the things is, and if you start thinking about it, it was a technology that came up in Germany, it was manufactured by an American company, and it was tested in Israel. And you start thinking about it, that's how globalization happens, and we use networks to actually do this. And if you think about it, we were the backbone for which all these things could happen. And one of the things I do have to say as an industry, I was very, very proud to be part of this industry, and the fact that we actually as an industry were key drivers in making all this happen over the last 2 to 3 years. So it's a pretty exciting time for us, and it's a great place for us all to be. Let's talk about the economy, and this is really to get to our CEO forum, what's going on and what are the key drivers that we see going forwards. One of the things that you should look at is today, from an industrial output standpoint, we're actually in probably what they call the fourth industrial revolution is happening today. And this industrial revolution has gone 3 times longer than any of the prior industrial revolutions, and it's gone at 4 times the speed of growth. So if you look at it, one of the things, and that's really because technology has started to play a part, and it's no longer just human beings driving the industrial revolution, it's actually technology. And I think one of the things that many people are asking, when will this bubble end, or when will this technology-driven, this growth stop? Reality is, we think it's going to be another 4 to 10 years, thanks to the changes in technology that have come through over the last decade. One of the things also is you look at, we're actually a world dominated. I always like to bring this slide up, but we're dominated by 5 key players. These guys actually today represent half of the United States market capitalization of our stock markets. But also, if you look at our networks, they generally represent roughly 75% of the network usage in terms of bandwidth is actually being used to go to these applications. So these 5 are one of the keys to success, but may not be the key for success in the future. So if you look at the last 2 decades, if you're a data center company, if you're a network operator, if you tie yourself to these 5, and I would say there's another 5 that are sitting across the border in China, which is Tencent and Alibaba and a series, China Cash and Baidu, you essentially have 10 companies that if you actually work with, you're pretty much guaranteed 25 to 30% growth every year. And so that's, if you look at many of the people, the successful models has come from essentially working with this group of characters. One of the things, if you start thinking about it, how did we get there? And I think we all started as sort of phone guys. And if you look at this conference 20 years ago, it was a bunch of people coming here to discuss accounting rates and satellite circuits and trying to figure out how we could connect various places together. We very quickly went on to become operators that started to carry data, and then we started to carry applications. And where we are today, this is, I mean, if you think about where we are, we've gone from essentially transport guys to application folks. Whether we like it or not, these applications are what drive. If you look at the prior 5 guys that were on that chart, they're application providers. And essentially, we become application providers ourselves. How we evolved? Essentially, it's through the handset. So every one of you, I'm looking at 4 or 5 of them up in the air right now taking photographs. But the reality is, it has been the handsets that actually have, the fact that we actually carry in our hand more computing power than the Apollo 13 had when it actually went to the moon. It's pretty amazing when you look at the realities of how far we've come in terms of the technology. And then obviously, I'm not going to go into where we are going with metaverse, but obviously we're hitting another generation of growth that's going to come, and it's going to come through a lot of different technology steps that are going to take place, whether it be artificial intelligence, whether it be the changing in terms of how we actually deliver software over our networks, and also how we actually do software-defined networks. Unfortunately, there will be challenges as we start to think about the global risk. Obviously, we saw there are problems with cyber wars. We saw droughts. We're seeing, if you look at the environment, there are things that have happened that have actually impacted technology. One of the things that you'll see is, as we've learned, hurricanes, typhoons, all can affect our technology. But also, there's a lot of trade issues that have actually evolved over the last 3 to 4 years. And also a lot of insular sort of focus on governments and nationalism, and actually how that impacts our various businesses. Probably one of the biggest, and this challenge will be, I think, for the next 4 to 5, if not 10 years, will be the China-US challenge. And we'll talk about this with our various speakers, but one of the biggest problems that we have is we're probably at the worst stage in diplomacy between the United States and China since the 1970s. And the reality is almost every day you hear of something that's going on between that's causing a trade war. Obviously, in telecommunications, this becomes an issue as we start to think about 5G, as we start to think about how we interconnect our cables between the United States and Asia. All these things start to impact how we'll actually be able to build technology and be able to deploy it. If you look at, just on this chart here, on this one side, there's a circle there, and that circle is sort of where most of the submarine cables of the world actually come into and have over the years. And that corridor is now the most disputed corridor in the world. And so one of the challenges that we're going to have in the next couple of years is how do we actually get submarine cables into these locations with both these countries arguing that they have ownership or they've got rights in these places. The other challenge is going to be what's going to happen with big tech. And one of the challenges that we've seen is that technology companies today, these guys have grown to a very, very large size. And if you look at history, when companies get to this size in terms of market capitalization, governments get involved. They start to look at monopolies and they start to say, all right, we're going to have different rules. And then they also start to look at it from a regional perspective. So Europe will start to look at it and say, what can we do to make sure that these companies don't show dominance? And so I think one of the things that we will see, and I think it'll be over the next 2 to 3 years, is there's going to be a real change in terms of these large companies. And it won't be just in the United States. We've already seen it in China. The Chinese, I think, have come after their own technology companies and said we don't want them to get too large. And so they're really looking at companies like Alibaba and Tencent and saying, okay, this is going to be a very, very different world, and we need to actually regulate these guys. And I think you're going to see that happening in the United States as well as in Europe. I think one of the things that I will turn it to the Chinese, and this is one of the great generals in China used to talk about how having everyone united in purpose will make us victorious. And I think one of the things that I could say, at least from watching what happened with COVID over the last 2 years, is that as an industry, if we can actually keep ourselves united, despite all of these challenges and tailwinds and issues between the United States and China, or challenges with our OTT partners, reality is I think we can get through almost anything. And I think one of the things is to keep the collaboration that we've kept in this industry for the last 2 decades and continue to keep doing that. And so without further ado, I'll bring on my 3 esteemed colleagues to talk about various business models.
Thank you. Aloha.
They're very excited to be here virtually. I'm going to see if I can move. Can you guys still hear me? I'm moving to the desk over here. But so what I'd like to do is one of the things that we're very, very fortunate to have today is that we have Keri Gilder, who runs Colt in Europe. And Colt is probably one of the pure play enterprise, both from a data center and from a fiber play. And it'd be good to get her perspective on how she sees, everyone talks about these 5 big players and how they dominate the industry. But I think what Colt's doing is really looking at how they can take those applications, which are largely consumer, and apply them to the enterprise. So Keri, what's your perspective on what's going on, and what's the future look like?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Thank you for having me today. And again, aloha to everybody in the audience there. I wish I was there. I do have my shirt on, but wish I had my pina colada in my hand with me as well. So in regard to the OTTs, you're correct. Colt is only enterprise. That's all we do. We don't do any consumer. But what we do is a lot of business, and we've been known for 30 years now as one of the providers to providers. And I think that holds true now as much as it did back then, although our providers have changed. So it's not just AT&T and Lumen and many of you in the Pacific that we serve, but it also is the OTTs. And what we've been able to do is actually build very strong relationships, whether it be on our data platform or on our voice platform, in order to enable cloud capabilities for the enterprise. And that includes applications such as Microsoft 365 and voice capabilities under Microsoft Teams, Google eMeet, as well as what we're using today, which is Zoom. So I think it's just an evolution of the entire ecosystem and how we engage with it. Just like the quote that you just mentioned stated, we have to work together, and the OTTs are as important to us as our traditional wholesale, other traditional wholesale operators.
Yeah, I think it's I think one of the themes, and I've watched some of the presentations from earlier today, but I think we are in an age where we're back to sort of this multi-domestic collaboration that's got to happen. Our regional players have really got to collaborate. And I think that leads me to my next speaker, Kamil. Kamil, I know obviously the Middle East has looked at sort of these regional models, but I think you guys at Zain have come up with some new ideas on how to approach the industry, and which is very different than what we've seen sort of in the United States or North America. So maybe you could give a view on sort of how your group is focusing on this new economy and this new way of operating.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for having me today or tonight for me, because it's like midnight my time. But look, I mean, I'm just going to give you some perspective about Zain. I mean, Zain, I think a lot of people will know, and I assume they will know Zain for being basically a mobile business. And I think that had been the case up to 3 years back, when we came up with a new strategy to transform Zain to become an integrated digital service provider. So we're focusing on creating new cores, and I'm not going to go into the details, but some of the cores are fintech, healthcare, ICT as well. But just in terms of telco evolution, we are moving from just mobile centric to basically integrated provider. So for the past 12 months, we have created 12 months ago basically created a company called Zain Global Connect. The aim is basically to consolidate the wholesale activities within Zain operations, 8 countries, mainly GCC and Levant, and then create one single interface basically for OTTs and enterprise business. On the back of that, I mean, we started also, investing. So we are investing in subsea cables. Just within 8 months, I think, we are, in the process of finalizing agreements to invest in 3 subsea cables. Okay, I think we're going to make an announcement very soon on that. And then we're building, state-of-the-art, fiber networks to connect all the GCC's countries, so Saudi Arabia to Oman to Bahrain to Kuwait to Qatar to Jordan, and we have a vision basically to create a new corridor, okay, to cross through the GCC and link the east to the west. And I think no one had been doing it in the past, and our market had been very close. So we're opening basically the market. We're trying basically to change the status quo. We're also looking at the data center layer. So build some of our plans basically, but we're planning basically to create a company that will focus on data centers for the region, create open access data centers for the region, which is something that almost doesn't exist in our region. So again, we are trying basically to challenge the status quo to create something that is different, because we believe by opening the access or opening basically the region, there will be more opportunities, and we'll basically just benefit as economies, as countries, basically of the revolution that is happening across the board.
So Keri, back to you. So one of the things that we've also you've been a very active data center operator. One of the things that we've seen in Asia Pacific this year has been this idea that you spin out data centers and you run them as a separate business because they get a higher multiple, or they're not really core to the telecom infrastructure. Do you see that as going to be the model going forward, or do you think that's just kind of an anomaly of the short term, the last few years? I mean, what's your view? Obviously, coming to it from a background where you own both.
Yeah, I think we as a parent, our parent company still does own both, but we operate them separately. So the data center business is operated separate from the core business, which is what I run. What I will say, though, is that they are highly interconnected. So regardless of whether it's a Colt data center, it's an Equinix data center, it's a Digital Realty or Interaction data center, it's critical for us to work together in order to enable the connectivity to the cloud. And that's where all of our businesses, most of our businesses, are now wanting to migrate into or currently are. So the reality is, whether you keep it as a pure play in order to increase your valuations, which is essentially what has happened in the telco mobile tower market, in the data center market, and even in some instances, we're starting to see it in the fiber infrastructure market now. I believe there is value in having access, collaboration, cooperation across that full ecosystem. And I also believe that there is extensive value today, but even more value to be seen tomorrow when it comes to the underlay and the overlay of the service provider infrastructure market. And what I mean by that is, if you own physical infrastructure and you have the software-defined network layer to provide on-demand and consumption-based services, with then another overlay of SD-WAN on top of it, there is value in that being all in one company and served as a holistic system back into the end user, whether that's the enterprise or it's a wholesale, another wholesale operator.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think it's a. I mean, it's obviously the capital markets, the bankers have views of this, and obviously private equity and a lot of the investors have a view of this, and obviously it's very black and white for them. But I think as an operator, we all look at it. I agree with you. I think it's got to be, in many ways, an integrated model is probably more successful in terms of retaining customers and bringing them an integrated solution. We've got Sridhar is joining us. Sridhar. And one of the things I love about Sridhar is he's managed to do, he was one of the first guys to really look at how you can actually deploy cloud to many, many markets outside of his data centers. And he came up with this concept called Cloud4C, which was a way to sort of expand the cloud capabilities of a discrete set of data centers so that you can actually go out into a much wider network. And maybe, Sridhar, can you give us sort of your thoughts behind that and why you did that? Because I think it's a pretty amazing and innovative sort of way you attack the data center and cloud market.
Thanks, Bill. As you said, COVID brought a billion people. I mean, I was not aware of this. Outstanding. A billion new people onto the internet. Reminds me of what happened in the last 30 years 1/4 of that happened in a year's time. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Obviously, it brings this kind of growth brings in new business models. Cloud4C was one such, and where we went out and established nodes all around the world, and with a specialized, computing power for banking and finance applications and highly regulated environment applications, or whether it's for the governments. And I see more interesting models emerging over a period of time. Everyone talks now about edge computing, and all the analysts are predicting. Frost & Sullivan says there will be 70 billion IoT devices powering this edge computing network, and Gartner predicts 75% jump in a couple of years. And PwC predicts 4x the business in the next 2-3 years in edge computing, so on and so forth. On the other side, yes, the technology is also evolving, which may demand edge computing, whether it is metaverse, or whether it is autonomous cars, or whether it is augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, so on and so forth. But as for any new major change to happen, there has to be a tipping point. You all have read the book of Malcolm Gladwell, I think, called Tipping Point. That has not yet come in for the edge computing. That's what I see clearly on the ground. So as an entrepreneur, when I look at it, and why take a bet? Edge is going to happen, yes. By when is a question mark.
Yeah.
So that's where it stands as it is.
Well, I think it's a fascinating, because I mean it's a segment that's evolving extremely quickly, and largely because of the new applications. I think one thing that maybe just switching to Kamil, normally we'd have all the big hyperscalers here, and they'd be talking about the most difficult market of the world, which is the Middle East, in terms of it costs the most to do anything. It's hard. How do you see things getting easier there and opening up in terms of having open data centers? I know you started to talk about this on your last answer, but I mean, do you think the Middle East is ready for change, where people can actually deploy network seamlessly across it, or do you think we're still going to have all these sort of pockets of government heavy regulation in the region? What's your thoughts?
I'm just going to use basically, the phrase that Sridhar has used, which is, the tipping point. I think we're getting there basically for the GCC. We've seen it, for instance, if you take one of the biggest markets in the GCC, Saudi Arabia, when you look at basically what's happening for the past, 3-4 years in terms of, government focus and vision, we're talking about basically projects like NEOM and all basic things happening around it. When we look at the regulations itself, I mean, now basically open access, in terms of fixed infrastructure, it's happening. Actually, it's regulated. Now enforcement, it's another story, but it's all happening. I think it's just a matter of time, because the government then now realize that they need to open, the country in terms of, infrastructure. They need to allow competition to come in. They need basically to allow or to reduce basically the cost of connectivity. We're seeing basically now, for instance, the cost of energy is being subsidized for data centers in Saudi Arabia. So I think the other countries, they will follow soon. Some will follow quicker than others, but definitely it's happening. And the plan for us, because Zain, I think we have a competitive advantage, which is we have licenses in most of those GCC's countries. So we're going to try basically to rely and basically ride on these licenses to build a network that is cross-country, cross GCC, that will allow basically, that will allow basically to open this market and allow, easy communication, easy interface with, OTTs and enterprise, and to be able to serve them across that region. So yeah, this is happening. It's happening now, and that's why as well, as Zain, basically, I think we're looking to deploy, a little more than $400 million over the next 3 years, just between subsea cables and terrestrial and that excludes actually the data center investments.
All right. Well, it's we're hopeful. I know it's all of us sit here and have been dealing with the Middle East for a long time, and we're hopeful that your words of wisdom are the realities. I think just to finish up here with each one of you, what I'd like to do is just give me your thoughts on what is going to be the one critical thing that you're going to need to do with your business this year, okay? And do you think this is a year of growth, or do you think it's a year of sort of flat or negative growth as we go through this new kind of era of COVID that no one really knows what the future looks like? So maybe give us your thoughts on, is this, what kind of year do we think we're going to have? This is obviously we're in January. And what do you think are the key things that, one thing that you've got to make sure you get done this year to make sure that it ensures that you grow in this year? So Keri, maybe start off.
Bill, I'm always the ever optimist. So of course I'm going to say growth. I think that the enterprise and consumers are ready for decisions to be made. And so I think where the last couple of years, there was a little bit of, waxing and waning associated with, should I migrate to the cloud now? Should I do it later? Should I wait for COVID to finish and then I'll do it then? Should I get my people back to the office? Should we stay in hybrid? Should we, have remote working? What should we do? I think those decisions will be made because we will learn how to live with COVID because it's not going to go away. And so we will learn how to live with it. And I think there'll be well-being decisions that management teams will make around remote working. I think that will then have a net impact on how we actually serve our customers, whether it be enterprise or consumer, and it's in a building, a cafe, or in a home. I think we'll have to collaborate more and more in order to enable that full suite of service across the full physical infrastructure that needs to continue to grow out, because whether it's satellite, it's a 5G, or it's some other type of wireless or remote capability, at the end of the day, that needs a wired connection, and it needs it sooner than sometimes we often think. So we'll continue to see an influx of fiber infrastructure being rolled out around the world. That will be both in partnership and also by independent companies, heavy by the private equity firms here in Europe. And on top of that, I think we'll really start to see a level of what I call digital exchange like we haven't seen it before. So we will see the collaborations, we will build the APIs, we will have that cross-platform enablement. There'll be an announcement coming out between Colt and another company here at PTC in the next day or so that really starts to expand upon that API capability, that global platform, and that enablement of the next generation of digital service that our industry is going to provide. And I'm personally super excited about it because I think there's a massive opportunity for us as companies and for our shareholders, but I also think there's a massive opportunity for us to attract some pretty critical and exciting talent into the industry as well.
Terrific, great answer. Kamil, what's your thoughts on the future?
Yeah, look, for the telco business, I think the growth is happening. We've seen it for the past couple of years, despite the challenges. But as Sridhar have mentioned, we have 1 billion users. So for us, it has implication in terms of usage of connectivity from the B2C, but also the enterprise, which is the new growth area for us as Zain Group. Our DNA or our background was mainly B2C. So B2B became basically new part of the business just 2 or 3 years ago. I think 2 years ago was just 6% of our revenue is coming from B2B. Now we're at 12%, and we are aiming for 30% from our revenue to be from the B2B by I think 2024. So we have growth on the telco, it's happening. On the wholesale or Zain Global Connect part, we spent last year basically building the team. We are seeing in the deals on the subsea. Basically, we secured the budget, by our board, basically for the fiber optic and for the data centers. This year is going to be mainly for deployment, and I think deployment we're going to continue up to 2023. And then I'm expecting 2023 forward, there will be growth, because frankly, there's a lot of business that is already coming our way. Now we're having discussion with some of the OTTs, and there is a great demand, as you mentioned, for this type of infrastructure that we're building today. So very positive, very positive.
Sridhar, take us home.
Yeah. Of course, coming from India, it's for CtrlS, it's absolute growth. We've been, just to give you an idea of some numbers, it took us 12 years to build about, not build, to sell about 30 megawatt of IT power. And in the last 1 year, 1.5 years, we took 30 to over 100 plus. And right now we are looking at another 900 megawatt of capacity going live in the next 3 to 5 years, for which the lands have been acquired and substations are being built. We inaugurated one of the largest GIS substation 3 days ago in Mumbai. It's a 220 kVA capable up to scalable to 300 megawatt. Similarly, we have decided to invest in Edge. About 8 city rollouts is happening in the next 6 months or so, followed by many more number of Edge locations, which will be announced soon. And we're going in building solar plants to fuel these data centers. We expect to go green, subject to whatever the regulators allow us, to be, to that extent, 100% green. Our Mumbai, our main data center, is going to be 100% green in 2022 itself. When I say 100%, as much as the regulator allows, I think there are certain limitations there. So overall, I see a tremendous growth, not just for CtrlS, but almost everyone in the industry within India. And most of the developing nations, I would say, will be the similar scenario.
Well, thanks, Sridhar, and thanks, Keri and Kamil. I think it was great to hear about your plans, and also to just keep the optimism and the fact that we're all going to hopefully collaborate. And it's a great sign that we're able to do this over video. And obviously, I'm more than hopeful that this time next year, we'll all be drinking Mai Tais here at PTC together. So thanks a lot for coming in virtually, and thank you for, I know many of you are up in the middle of your night, so we do appreciate you doing that for us and giving us your thoughts. So thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having us.